to the channel and to a bit of a different but fun kind of lore video. I mean, it's set on Aphalas, but it's having a little bit more fun with it. And that is, we're basically going to take Aphalas and we're going to play a little bit of a what if with it. And the what if is relating to Warcraft. The simple case of the what if is, could the second invasion, second war of World of Warcraft, or Warcraft, take it into Aphalas and see how successful they would end up being and the potential locations they could depart from, the ones that would maybe make some logical sense and stuff, and just see how they would fare. And with all of this in mind, there are going to be some set rules that I'm going to establish. I know the numbers on the Warcraft side are not extensively stated. I also know that the numbers in case of Aphalas are not extensively stated. So we're going to go based off the power dynamics. We are going to be looking in detail at like the different stature and the different advantages that each people bring. So it's going to be a bit of an intriguing one. There is going to be one key rule here though, and it is the time frame we are looking at. And the time frame that we are looking at in terms of Aphalas is just after the conclusion of the Shadow Dance. So, the continent of Arisen has the A-gate barrier around it. So it is not fully but largely cut off from the rest of Aphalas. And if we are throwing in some other dynamics with it being cut off, it means that it means a couple of things we need to address. It means the Faerun humans up here are almost completely out of action, unless it is strictly on Arisen that this happens. The Ice Elves have been very much crippled. The Kirindreg have taken some losses, but not too many. The steppe tribes are in a bit of chaos all over the place, especially the northern ones. The southern ones, not so much. The Ijati are now more split and stretched between their two realms. So we have all of those dynamics to look at, but there are some other elements we need to address, and as the sort of characters who we've got floating around currently when it comes to Aphalas, some of the named ones, you have various, not counting the ones who are still on Arisen, looking beyond that, you've got dragons such as Trelvin and Ganessa, because this is before Trelvin's disappearance. You've got Raunor floating around there as well for a bit. You've got some of the others who are notable warriors but aren't necessarily massive powerhouses. You've got characters like Thoronsia, who is a very noted warrior, as is current leader of the Ajati, and I constantly get the names muddled up. It's either Tinir or Tivos, who wields the bow of Calastenir. The Spear of Arakan. Well, actually, I've fudged that up slightly because Thoronsia is not actually currently, at this point, he's not ruling Erelgard, he's still in Arakan. So it's one of the previous leaders of the Wood Elves. But in terms of details and things, let's just going to break it down in one thing to start with, which is the sort of strengths of each side in terms of the peoples. The orcs from Warcraft are obviously these hulking brutes who can easily overpower a human. Um, you've got in the second invasion, you've got obviously the alliances as well. You have elements of ogres, trolls, and goblins in there. So you've got various different groups. The goblins at this point obviously have some technological bonuses and things, so how much that would play a factor, I'm not 100% sure, but it is a noted advantage that they have. The trolls are also quite mystically based and things and tribal. You've got ogre mages in there as well. This is also the second war, so it is led by Orgrim Doomhammer. So he's going to be the sort of noted leader for all of this. They also had the Red Dragonflight, which is something that I did definitely not look up whilst also doing this video. And other elements like a little bit of subterfuge, but how much that's really going to play into this is not too known. But in general, let's list it how it is. You have the orcs under Orgrim, you've got the Red Dragonflight, you've got the goblins who have the technological elements to them with like the early tech and stuff, trolls with skilled maneuver if they can work it. But the one thing that I will say that lets the trolls down in here is that Aphalas does not have a massive amount of forests, so that may play a bit of an issue for them. And then you've got the ogres as well with their magic and their hulking strength. So if we just simply look at the physical prowess to begin with the orcs and the ogres in particular, what peoples in Aphalas can effectively take them on, like physically, and the main ones who can match them strength for strength would be the ogres of either well, in particular Hedotelic, but also Sarakarth, or the trolls of Talonser, in particular those who would eventually become Clan Batrakia. They're the larger of the groups. They've got stronger prowess and things. You could also argue that the half ogres would have a pretty good chance as well, but in terms of physical strength, you could count the Kirindrek, but obviously with the A-gate barrier up, it depends how much they'd be able to work. Again, with the half rhinos as well, they would be strong, but how strong is the question. So in physical might, those are the elements, but these two. And one thing I am trying with this is I am trying to keep it relatively realistic to what would actually happen. So it's not going. So whilst the factions like Nagrasax Demesne with the demons and all of that, whilst they could unleash torrents and torrents of the demons against the orcs and all of that, firstly, it's not guaranteed they would actually succeed, and secondly, would they do that alone? or would they do that in unison with the others? And it would really depend on that. So, taking the demons out of the equation for the moment, what would the sort of alliance to take on this invasion consist of? And it would be the protector races, the trolls, the dwarfs, the wood elves, the dragons, the Ajati, the Kirindrek if they can. So it'd be those 6, and if it really got desperate enough as well, potentially some involvement from the ancients and other creatures. You would also arguably be able to muster up the majority of the human factions as well. The ones of Destinal probably quite a bit, as would the Temple Guard of Galeria, not that they are massive in number. The humans of Onokrith would be a bigger stretch to get on because, again, it would depend partly on the Ruby Mist and also how the location as well. And we'll get into the locations in a little bit, but you do have still a somewhat strong alliance, because one thing that I have noted is that whilst the main realm of the Kirindrek, Arakirin, can't necessarily be involved because of the barrier and the state of affairs, the Kirindrek of Mayajon definitely can. They may not be as massive in number, but they are still present, as are the humans of Ancestonir, whether they'd be involved or not. Again, the Arik Nihilith is completely free to be involved in this, but the numbers are not a massive thing. And on top of all of this, there are a few other factions to address as well. At this point in time, the goblins of Haraketh are still present, so whether they'd involve themselves or not is up for debate, though it's logical to say they probably would. The ogres of Sarakarth could potentially be persuaded to. However, the dark elves would be very much tied to what happens with Nagrasak, whether Nagrasak sends them forward or not, because they're capable of making their own choices, but they are his chief servants. They are the ones who swore fealty to him first, so they don't do a lot without his say, unless it comes down to a matter of survival. And if we just, for a moment here, take a step back from the strength and look at some sort of chief locations that this invasion could come from. Obviously, the second invasion I don't think necessarily comes from the portal, they're already established, but just looking at it logically, let's address the elephant in the room first with Onarkivris. Is there anywhere logically in Onarkivris that this invasion could strike forward from? And the Lost Forges could be an interesting dynamic, or some sort of corruption of Neserez. So there are a couple of areas there, or potentially up in the open north of Davarek or the Sentinel. And if I'm being completely frank to the world, my own world here, I think given the numbers and the sort of tactics and the fact that they are led by someone who's actually an intelligent fighter and not just a mad, corrupted orc, I would say that if they did appear on Onarkivris, especially with enough room to be able to spread forward, yeah, it would be a problem. Because around this time, one thing is, and whilst the timeline's not fully established here, Arios Seablade is active in the north, but he's one of the few figures who are with his group, who are basically exiled from Steogris. So And regardless of wherever you place them, the thing that the second invasion host would have to rely on here is speed. They would absolutely have to. If they tried to delve into Nacerez and go after the demons, that could be a very interesting dynamic, because on the one hand, the first demons are incredibly powerful, hence why they got isolated, but could they take on all of that with magic and dragons and all of that? Probably not, especially with necromancy magic mixed in as well. But then below them, you've also got the wyverns in the Labyrinth of Beasts, who once upon a time were one of the protectors of the world. So seeing the demons get attacked would immediately alert them. And then you do have other groups as well, like the actual factions of On Archivorous. Now, if they were supposedly to form here and push through the savannah, the first faction that would face them would be Medeiros. Could the half-ogres of Medeiros fend them off, or at least keep them at bay? I think there is potential of them being able to hold off for a while. There are some obvious advantages that this group have, like numbers, being able to overpower one kingdom faction quite potently if they get the advantage. But the thing about Medeiros is that it's got the bridgeheads. And I know that this seems a little bit absurd, but this is the second invasion coming through and forming. They would maybe have the potential of being able to bring some ships and stuff like that. Would it be enough to follow through and take them on, in particular when dealing with On Archivorous? Because both the half-ogre factions do have ships. They're not the best ships, but they do have them. And crossing through the Ruby Mist. But then on top of that, you've got the wyverns around there as well, and you've got the sea elves, some of the best seafarers in all of Aphalas. So could they realistically do enough impact, or would the sea elves be able to muster in enough time? I would say the one thing, though, if they did start here, is that without a shadow of a doubt, as much as a good fighter as he is, as much as a chief fighter he is, Arios's people would just get overwhelmed and just cut down. So that would be one very notable Aphalas fighter off the board almost immediately. And I would argue that in this scenario, the half-ogres, if they're able to get the sea elves Hedotelic and their kin in Zakenvraw and the Marixin on board, I mean the Marixin would come on board anyway, but if they could get the other three factions on board, they would have a chance of being able to hold off. Would they win? I don't know, is the simple truth, because as physically strong as Hedotelic are, they are not massive in number. The Sea Elves, again, skilled and everything, but in drawn out land fighting against those with necromancy and magic and early technical designs, yeah, it would be difficult to say the least. But if you threw in Onokrith into the mix as well, with the mix of goblin human culture, especially with the early sort of firearm designs and things, that starts to maybe balance it out a little bit more. But that would involve Onarchivorous basically being almost entirely united to fend that threat off. Not to mention the factor that if they did come down from the Alanais and Fana, it would take a while to be able to muster the Onokrith forces, who aren't really used to massive armies or drawn out fighting either. Their terrain doesn't really allow for it. So whilst their technology would be there to maybe balance it out against and somewhat nullify the goblin technology advantage, which is a key thing the second invasion have, would it be enough? Again, not sure. But if we were to change it around and say that the second invasion somehow appeared from the Lost Forges, Onokrith would be screwed. Basically, there would be very little they'd be able to do to stop them. So you could see basically the entire eastern coastline of Onokrith fall in quite rapid succession. Onokrith would fall. If they chose to go north, they would overwhelm whatever is left of these troll colonies. Zakenvraw could be in serious danger as well. So it is quite a location-based thing. And again, about the speed. Thing is that if they start in this zone over here, they're going to run into trouble quite quickly. Whereas Onokrith's relations with the half ogres are much more kind of strained. So, and there's the whole thing about the kingdom. It is a kingdom relatively got its back to the water and is surrounded by enemies, or ones who aren't fans of them, not necessarily enemies, but not friends either. So, yeah, bit of a poor dynamic here. But let's move away from Onokrith. I'm just going to say it right here and now. Given the state of things, if they did land on Arasin, as powerful as the Kirindrak are, and with the presence of the Sparrowhawks as well, I'm sorry, but I really, really doubt that they'd be able to stop it, partly because of just the open space. If you've got an army that's quickly marching down and taking steppe tribe settlement one by one, the entire steppe could fall, and fall quite rapidly as well. The ice elves are crippled in the north, so they wouldn't put up a whole lot of resistance. The Faerun could easily end up getting cut off as well, so it's almost the case that whilst Onokrith is quite selective on where they go, Arasin is so massive that any sort of resistance would just not be able to consolidate quickly enough or form enough to be able to bulwark them. So, and especially if they came into like the Icy of Arasin, because there's like just nothing that would be able to stop them. Especially if they just charged into the realm of Arakirin. Basically, if you look at Arasin and you look at this, if they were going to be able to fend off that second invasion, they need Arakirin. They need the Kirindrak. Without them, they're done. It's the simple answer. But let's turn around and address the actual main part of Aphalas now. And there are a couple of places where you could envision an invasion coming from. Galakaros is one, like somehow they form out of Baralath or something. Out of the desert in Shar, that's another option. I don't really know if there's anything on the Twin Isles that would necessarily make logical sense, but I mean, it's a what if. It's like trying to keep it realistic, but to a certain point, you just have to kind of say, fine. And the other one is from Tonreef's sort of zone here, because at this point in the timeline, Tonreef is flying about, but his domain isn't necessarily back up and running yet. So it's just, that's not currently present at the moment. So if we address Baralath first, you've got the slopes of Collage, which have the ancient, the original protectors of the land operating there. You've got Haraketh, and then you've got the jungles of Obsidian, where necromantic magic is suspiciously strong. But there is another thing that is going on at this point in the timeline, which is within Baralarth, there is an unforeseen other factor slowly just building up behind the scenes, and that's Senetvia. So if they did invade here, it's not just a case that they'd be fighting the goblins of former Thornreth, whilst also having the ogre magic and the necromancy magic through the Death Knights being bolstered, probably. They've also got literally one of the gods of Aphalas there, who's not necessarily at full strength, but certainly nothing to be trifled with either. So, whilst I seriously doubt Galakaros would be able to hold off, and I do think the goblins would most likely fall, I think it would take a lot longer than necessarily anticipated, because either Senetvia would have to go into hiding or would probably have to come out and fight. And if she did, because just to put a little point of reference here, whilst Nagrasak is at this point is still banished and Amendiel's gone, as is the father, Galeria is still present as well, and she would be the sort of chief coordinator, as she tends to be. And they are still bound, so if something happened to Senetvia, she would sense it quite rapidly. So with Galakaros, maybe more than anything else, it's a real case of speed. Would the second invasion be able to overwhelm it and impair Senetvia quick enough to stop that, or would it take too long, and would the other forces be alerted? And if the other forces do get alerted, well, then you've got... And just to line this up right now, you've got the vast majority of the orc tribes, the forest trolls, the goblins, ogres, and the red dragonflight against, just lining these factions up, the forest dwarves of Alaros, the Ijati, at least of Callus 10 here, the trolls of Talonser, who at this point are still all united, the dragons of Darenthal, and probably the Sister Realm Isles as well, Sister Isle Realms, the Kirindreg of Myrjorn, the Wood Elves of Erelgarth, the 4 human kingdoms, and maybe Ancestornir as well. And that's just on the Protector level. If other forces, like, because the Indigo Blooded are also a factor in all of this in the subterranean lands, so would they get involved as well and add basically Aphalas vampires into the mix? But I think, because this has been dragging on for a while now, not dragging on, that's the wrong turn of phrase, but I've been nattering for a while, and whichever scenario tends to occur, I think one thing that is absolutely safe to say is, just by the sheer volume of forces that they're up against, Aphalas does not get out of this with every people surviving. If it's Galakaros, I could imagine the goblins falling, and potentially Senetvia as well. If it came to the Lost Forges on Onokivris, is Onokrith. If it's anywhere at this point in Arisen, unfortunately I think it's pretty much all of Arisen that falls, especially with the barrier up. If it's in the western half of Onokivris, then I would argue probably a very strong chance of, well, definitely Arios's group, and probably a strong chance of the very least Medeiros and maybe Hedotelic. or would Hedotelic get ignored and they would focus on the Sea Elves? It's different potential here. In terms of the Red Dragonfly, I know they are very powerful. I haven't really done a massive power scaling on the Wyverns, except for the factor that they were the Thornwraith who got abandoned because they were deemed too destructive, and the factor that over on the Shrouded Eye, the new Protectors of the Sky, the Sparrowhawks, literally primarily exist to keep the Wyverns in check. So, in terms of magic, though, that's a bit of a strange one because necromancy exists in both, and you've got the Death Knights on the one hand, but then you've also got, again, you've got figures like, well, the most notable one at this point in time in the lore is Olacron, who's about somewhere in the world at this point with Forry, but you've also, even without the Kirindrek, you do have the Dragons, the Narracorn Enhir, the training of the enchanters and the warrior enchanters, and they're not bound to the same laws as the Kirindrek, so whilst they cannot use A-gate magic, the magic of the arcane, they can use Feldspar, Obsidian, Ruby, Emerald, or Sapphire. So nature, necromancy, illusion, healing, or just bolstering material. And you've also got the indigo blooded, who might be few in number but also have their own specific magic with the earth bending. And yeah, you've also got the animalistic creatures. Now, on the animal side of things, there is one thing that does have to be established, and I know it's going to be a bit random because they are relatively isolated, but Natog's people are incredibly few in number now after Senetvia escapes. So, and Natog himself is, at this point, dead. So, yeah, the giant scorpions would not be able to, even if they did make it into the other lands, they would not be a massive amount of help. The ancients, on the other hand, and again, is another key thing, whilst most of the ancients are still in their slumber and sleep, the ancients of the sea are not. And I think ultimately that is part of what it boils down to. And one of the key things to address here is that a downside to that second invasion force is no matter where they land, wherever they push and move to dominate, if they do want to press forward or things, they have to go beyond. They have to utilize ships and, I don't know, maybe a select few bits of aircraft that the goblins may come up with, though I don't know how much that really is. I can't imagine it's a lot. And they have got the Red Dragonflight as well, which can come in helpful. But when you turn around and look at the way that the world of Aphalas is laid out, seafaring is incredibly important. And whilst in terms of aerial support, they are actually severely lacking. Like, unless the Wyverns involve themselves, or Wyverns involve themselves, I can never remember how to properly pronounce that. Really, the only thing they're left with are potentially the Sparrowhawks, who, unless they can get past the barrier, they're relatively stuck. Now, there is actually one figure who can lend some form of aerial support, but then we've got the same matter as Senetvia, and that's Galeria, because Galeria's more animalistic form is that of a phoenix, so she could ultimately lead the way in this naval conflict or defense. And yeah, there is actually one other force that, if they tried to take on Dragonflight in the sky, it probably wouldn't necessarily work, but if they kept low and just moved to sort of harass, it could work quite well. It's the fact that the Ajati as a people can fly. Like, they are winged humanoids, they can fly. So, but in terms of the in terms of the seafaring potential, even if you remove the Dark Elves or the Sarakarth Ogres from the equation, you have the Dragons, you have the Trolls, you have the Kingdom of Cathaltir. All three of these are strong seafaring factions. Revlaror as well can offer some presence on that. And again, then we're floating into the other elements, like, do the Sea Elves end up involved in all of this because they can pass the Ruby Mist? They are known to do that with the presence of an enchanter. So, could they potentially lend a hand as well? And I think ultimately, despite the numbers or things like that, if Orgrim did attempt to move his forces at sea, it would not go in his favour. So I think there is the absolute potential where he could pass through and offer quite a bit of success and dominate presence and things like that. Like, there are areas where he could easily overpower and take over quite a bit. And selective targets, like if he did get into Tonroof's domain, I know how powerful the Dragons are in this world. I know how strong they are. Would they be able to resist a force of that size? No. It's the simple answer. Even with all the enchanters, even with everything, they'd be able to hold for a while, but they would probably fall. And if they fall, then there's a strong chance that Revlaror would as well. And I always kind of... It's a bit of a domino here, and I feel bad about that because I feel like I always bash on Revlaror. But as competent as they are, there's just too many like exposed points. But the question would be, would these two be able to fend off long enough for the other factions on Destinal to properly unite and get the word out for support? Because if they can, that would change the dynamic. I mean, if Galeria involved herself in that fight, it would change the dynamic. Like, out of the creators, she's not the strongest fighter, but it's also, like, I'm saying she's not the strongest fighter out of creatures who are gods. They are all still competent, it's just she's not the strongest of the lot of them. And yeah, I know this has been a bit of a random video. It's the first time I'm trying something like this, a little fun what if. I would like to address it with some others that are maybe, I don't know, a little bit more balanced. Like, I don't know, what if, say, Sauron's army from the Pelennor randomly appeared in the deserts of Shar or something. Something like that, which is still obviously a bit odd, but it would tone it down a little bit. Because, yeah, I wanted to do the Warcraft one because it's more better variety and things like that. And I mean, thoughts have crossed my mind about, like, oh, could we try and do an end times factor with the Chaos Gods all invading? And it's like, firstly, I don't know enough about that to really do that, but also, just by the nature of how the Chaos Gods work in Warhammer, that would just be strange, to say the least. But I hope you guys enjoyed. It was a bit more of a fun one today. So this will be dished out, and I will start looking at some other what ifs as well. So if people do have like any ideas for what ifs and that with this or with some of the other works, then yeah, please do let me know, because whilst a lot of this was me rambling, I did have quite a bit of fun with it as well. So yeah, it would be quite interesting to see. I guess another that I could actually maybe do is actually trade it around a little bit, like if Sinetvia's forces in the Crisis of Galakaros specifically what happens if they arrived on Middle Earth or something? How far would they be able to get? That could be a bit of an interesting one. But for now, I'm just going to say, please do comment, like, and subscribe. Share with your friends if you could deal with my rambling. And if you want to pick up a copy of Aphalas or Code of Chivalry or Soul of the Gem, you've got the Payhip, which I do need to reiterate are so far only the digital version, so they're PDFs, they're not actual physical paperback books yet. Or the Ko-fi, which again, here, they'll be linked in the description again, and yeah, that's got both. Well, it's got the digital of all three and the paperback of the first one, because the second and third Aphalas books have not actually gone through print runs yet. So, yeah, hopefully that won't be too long before they do, but for now, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellowmind books.